Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are picking back up again with Venom Beyond, right? And this is basically the start of the King in Black, and you guys will see what I'm talking about once we get towards the end of this. But this is basically where King in Black begins, right? So I'm really excited about this, and I think that what we might do sometime this week as part of a lead up to the whole King in Black thing is we might take all of Donny Cates' Venom run and just kind of condense it down into a full story. We'll call it like part 1 or like the King in Black lead up or something along those lines, but something to indicate this is all the stuff that you need to know going into like the King in Black. But this basically picks up again with this alternate reality that we're in, Earth 1051, whereby you have Dylan, this alternate reality version of this alternate reality version of the son of Eddie Brock, who basically conquered the world, and where Matt Gargan had been sent to the forces of Eddie for the purpose of basically taking them down, that he also operates as a kind of spy of sorts, right? That Dylan can see through his symbiotes. But what we ended up seeing was that, like the previous video, Scorpion was essentially defeated. And so this all kind of coincides with Dr. Octopus showing up to Dylan, right? Codex. We'll call him Codex for the sake of keeping this video simple instead of talking about two different versions of Dylan. But he runs up on Codex and he basically tells him that they've reverse engineered the armor that Scorpion wore when he was initially going after Eddie Brock and using the name Virus. And that because this armor is based on the War Machine Mark III model that was created by Tony Stark for James Rhodes, it includes what's basically automated environment scanning technology, which essentially means that it scans the environment and then records the environment. And this kind of confirms the statement of Scorpion to Codex when he was initially captured, that he came from an alternate reality. But what's more important about this is that when it comes to alternate realities in Marvel Comics, you have what's kind of what's been referred to historically as a kind of quantum frequency, basically meaning that each individual universe has its own range, more or less, right? So the way I like to use it is if we talked about music, right? So we say like the main Marvel universe is the key of C, and the ultimate universe might be like might be like C sharp or something like that. But if the main Marvel universe is in the key of C, then what this means is that in order to access the main Marvel universe, your quantum signal or your ability to create a portal means you have to resonate at the key of C as well, right? So that's what this suit basically does. This suit will, at least accessing this suit and being able to reverse engineer it, would allow Otto Octavius to, in effect, recreate a portal that would allow them to access the main Marvel universe. And with his intelligence, it would only take him about 2 weeks to do. And so the idea is get to work on it, right? Because it means there'd be more worlds for Dylan to conquer, essentially. At that point, you switch over to the underground laboratory of Reed Richards in this alternate reality, the crazy Reed Richards, who's basically kind of talking to Scorpion, to Matt Gargan. And he really just kind of reiterates everything that we were already told. And it's kind of nuts because there was an Iron Man in this universe. And of course, much like the main Marvel universe, Reed Richards and Iron Man were friends, meaning that he's well versed in Stark's technology. The problem with this is that he's also insane. And so his response is, yes, I can rebuild that gate, but it'll take me like 5 years to do, right? It'll take me like 5 years to do that because their resources are exceedingly limited. If they had like all the resources available out there, then sure, they'd be able to do it. But between his insanity and a lack of resources, they simply just can't. And so you have this moment here where they talk about the idea of going back, and then the response of Dylan is, but I don't want to. The reason why is because Dylan never knew his mom, right? He never knew Ann Weying. And so being in this alternate reality where he meets her for the first time, it makes sense he doesn't want to go back, right? It makes sense that he doesn't want to leave anymore, that he wants to stay here. He never knew his mom, right? And so he's always wanted to get to know his mom. He's now in a situation where he can. Why would he want to give that up? It's everything he ever wanted. And so with that being the case, it's almost like he's kind of being forced, right? Pulled, ripped away from this life that he wants so dearly. And so with that being the case, Ann just kind of realizes that it's turning into a kind of sentimental moment. And Ann has still not gotten over the fact that her son in this universe, this reality's version of Dylan, became a bad guy, right? He became Codex. He conquered the world and killed pretty much everybody she cared about and turned them into symbiotes. And so she basically like tells everybody, get out, right? Everybody's got to go. Everybody go rest. Tomorrow we're taking this war to my son, right? Now it all kind of comes to a head when you've got, Ann doing her thing because she can't sleep. And then Dylan shows up. And the two of them have this very, kind of sentimental moment. And the reason for that is because whenever Codex came across her symbiote or tried to contact her symbiote, she would burn. But with Dylan from the main Marvel universe, that doesn't happen. And the reason for that is because much like we've seen with like something like the Infinity Gauntlet, which only works in its native universe, Dylan, Codex can only control symbiotes in his own universe. And so any symbiote or any being that's attached to symbiotes outside of this universe, Codex cannot control. And that's the reason why when Dylan approaches Ann Weying, because he's from the main Marvel universe, he does not affect her symbiote in the same way. He can hug her, he can interact with her, he can treat her like a mom. And that's kind of what he says, right? You know, he says like, you know, when this is all said and done, like, I don't really want to leave. I don't really want to go. But if we do have to go back to my universe, then come with me, right? Like, come with us, be my mom in that universe. It's a very touching moment, right? This is especially touching if you know the history of Ann Weying, how tragic her story's been over the years, or at least was until they killed her off. Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very intriguing thing to see here, and it's really, really cool. And so what this does is kind of, you know, really inspire a kind of renewed vigor inside of Ann, in the sense that she realizes she can't run away from who her son's become, right? She can't run away from the fact that her son has become Codex, that her son has done terrible things. It's not necessarily to say that she has, but that's kind of the impression that's being put off here, is that historically speaking, when it comes to her son Codex, sure, she's been fighting the good fight, but she's also been dreading the time at which she would actually have to take him down. In this moment, realizing the man her son could have become, and if he can be saved, the man he can still become, then there's all the incentive in the world to kind of leave that fear and that anxiety behind and travel headfast into facing off against this guy. And that's exactly what they do. The other part of this is that Codex comes to the realization, of course, the one that we already realized, that he cannot control the symbiotes from alternate realities either. Much like Peter Parker and Venom, he also can't detect them. And so that's kind of the funny thing, is that for him, whenever he tries to reach out and detect the symbiote of Eddie Brock, the Venom symbiote that's attached to him, he can't pick up on it, right? Because it's not from his universe. And so as they're kind of in the middle of all this, and as Otto Octavius is continuing to work on this you know, portal of sorts, there's a kind of an alarm that comes in, and it's basically a unmanned aircraft that's basically, you know, heading towards their location. And when Otto Octavius says that there's no life forms on board, that's when it dawns on Codex, no, there's life forms there, but it's the Venom symbiote, right? The one that I can't pick up. And this thing comes cruising in and just boom, smashes right inside the ceiling of this place, right? From there, Ann Weying's like, everybody get in, and they all go flooding into that place, right? Attacking everybody they can. Now, right off the bat, Donny Cates gives us Codex versus Venom. And it's a cool thing to see, because this is basically like Spider-Man fighting Venom, right? Spider-Man cannot detect the Venom symbiote, and that's one of the things that makes Venom so deadly for Spider-Man. Much like this here, Codex cannot control the Venom symbiote. And so he's facing off against a very powerful person relative to himself, whose symbiote he cannot dominate. And this fight ends incredibly fast, right? And that's one of the big differences here. That's kind of the big weakness of Codex, is that you would look at him and you would say, okay, but a person who was able to conquer the world using symbiotes, surely he'd be able to overtake Venom. But there's a big difference here. Eddie Brock has fought time and time again as Venom with the symbiote, facing off against a multitude of enemies. The Codex seemingly has not. That I wouldn't go as far as to say that he rested on his laurels while the world was being conquered, but there's a difference between fighting some heavy-hitting superheroes by yourself and fighting a whole bunch of heavy-hitting superheroes with hundreds of symbiotes at your side. It really kind of diminishes what your accomplishments are. It diminishes what it is that he could actually do, because for the most part, he didn't really do it on his own. And so in response to that, he basically calls in the entirety of the Avengers team. They all come pouring in, right? All the symbiote Avengers guys. And then while that's going on, Gargan basically sneaks off, grabs his virus suit. And in the moment when you have Eddie Brock, who seizes control of Codex for the purpose of defeating him, what he ends up intending to do is actually have his symbiote bond itself directly to Codex, and then in turn show him this life that he could have had, right? A kind of shared memory. But that's when Virus makes his attack, right? Matt Gargan shows up at the most inconvenient time and starts attacking, you know, Eddie Brock, and basically says like, you're going to take me back to prison once we get back there, and that's not going to happen. Either I'm going to have my vengeance here, or I'm not going to have it at all. But in the midst of his whole attack, suddenly he's shot in the back by Reed Richards, who would basically use the technology of Tony Stark to take down the War Machine suit, right? So Gargan's completely out of the picture. What this does is it leads to Eddie Brock being able to subdue Codex yet again, and then Codex actually starts reaching out directly to Dylan, right? And what this does is it allows a kind of shared memory state, in the sense of it's all the things that Dylan can basically pass through his mother, and all the things she can pass through to him in terms of the life that he always wanted to have with her, the life she always wanted to have with him, and then Eddie Brock's memories of the life he had with his son, bonding them all together. And when that happens, Codex gets a vision of what his life could have looked like. They all kind of do, to be honest. Like, it's really Eddie, and it's Dylan, and it's Ann Weying, and it's Codex, all kind of experiencing this joint memory of how life could have been, how fantastic it could have been. But because of the decisions of Codex, it never happened. That and the fact that Eddie Brock took his own life, those never came to fruition. And so because of that, Codex is completely overwhelmed by the experience, but in turn basically gets rid of all the symbiotes, right? He just stops his influence over them and stops, and kind of comes back to his his normal self. Now, the other part of this seems to be that Knull had an exceedingly strong grip on Dylan on Codex. And so when this whole sort of shared memory took place, it actually released him from the influence of Knull and kind of returned him back to his normal self. But regardless of how you slice it, he's basically back to being a good guy now. The problem is that he falls into what's essentially a catatonic state, right? So you jump forward by about a year or so, and this is a pretty significant moment, that in all this time that they've been here, you have Dylan, you have Eddie Brock, and you have Ann, who have all just basically been spending time together as a family, the way that they always imagine themselves doing this. That is basically a pretty chill world. And the response of all this, I mean, I'm sure you probably have some small-time criminals, but nothing too crazy, right? Nothing too outrageous. Instead, it's basically just them kind of enjoying their lives. And so because of that, there's always kind of looming on the horizon this idea that they're all going to have to go back, right? That they're going to have to go back to their universe. And so about a few months after that, with Dr. Octopus having had the absolute tar beat out of him by Reed to the point that he actually started giving him information on how to build this thing, that the portal is effectively finished. But Ann is actually going to stay behind because with her son, her son Dylan, I guess formerly Codex, now Dylan, kind of back in a catatonic state, but also demonstrating that he basically, came back to being a good guy, right? That he's more or less cured, for lack of a better word. Now she's going to wait until he reawakens and then try to nurse him back into, kind of having a normal life here. But for Dylan himself and for Eddie, of course, they go back to the main Marvel universe where the King in Black and everything kicks off. And this is what's really kind of interesting here. It looks like a year has actually passed in the main Marvel universe as well. And the reason why this matters is because with this 1 year time jump in that period, Knull seems to have come back, right? Knull returned. He returned in the main Marvel universe. And the reason why we know this is because when they get back there, all the stars are gone. There's nothing out there but absolute blackness. That Knull has officially returned and has already begun the process of conquering the main Marvel universe. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.